Yes, it's John G. Sutton. Tales from the Jails. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the death penalty, about the sentence of execution that used to be passed in Great Britain until it was 1965 when it was finally fully reprieved. But I'm going to talk about two specific cases. First of all, I'm going to talk about the case of Ruth Ellis, who was the last female to be hung in Great Britain. And she was hung on the 13th of July 1955 at Holloway Prison in London. She was hung for the shooting. She shot a man called David Blakey. Now, today, if all the facts of the case, Ruth Ellis, were actually heard by a court, it's quite likely that she would be, it would be a crime of passion. You see, Ruth Ellis was seriously abused by David Blakey, who was a former public school boy, racing driver, friend of the famous racing driver at the time, Mike Hawthorne. You Google that, Mike Hawthorne. And she moved in that circle, you see, did Ruth Ellis. She was reasonably well known. And she was the managing a club called the Little Club in Knightsbridge. Yeah. And one of the clients, of course, was David Blakey, and he was splashing his money round and managed to impregnate Ruth Ellis and said he was going to marry her. Didn't marry her. She had an abortion to get rid of the child, and then she managed to get herself with another man called Cousins, and she was going to marry him. But David Blakey tried to get back to her, into her life again, impregnated her again. Obviously, they were continuing this mad affair, and she lost that child when David Blakey punched her in the stomach. She had an instantaneous miscarriage due to the fact that he had punched her, and he was a violent man, was David Blakey, and she couldn't help it. I mean, a lot of ladies, they kind of get infatuated with these men. She was, to a certain extent, infatuated with David Blakey, and one day she just had enough after he'd beaten her and left her again. She got herself armed with a Smith & Wesson, a .38 Smith & Wesson, and followed David Blakey to a pub and waited for him outside the pub because she could see his car parked in the street. And when he came out of the pub, she came out from the doorway of a newsagent's nearby and shot him numerous times. I believe she shot 5 bullets. The first bullet missed. 4 bullets went into him, one at absolute point blank range that she shot through his back, and it put powder burns onto his body. It was that close, so it must have been within an inch. Yeah, and the 6th bullet hit the pavement, ricocheted off, and blew the thumb off of some poor passerby woman. Anyway, Ruth Ellis was subsequently found guilty and executed on the 13th of July 1955 at Holloway Prison, and the executioner was Albert Puerepoint. He was originally Albert Puerepoint was from Ashton-under-Lyne, and he ran a pub in Manchester when he wasn't hanging people, that is. And he was, to a certain extent, a friend of my father's, because my father was a police officer at the time, stationed in Manchester, and he knew Albert Puerepoint. The strange cases around Ruth Ellis. A son hung himself in 1985, after some years after her execution. Her ex-husband killed himself. Her mother gassed herself in a gas oven, put her head into a gas oven. So there's a lot of tragedy around Ruth Ellis, and all this stemmed from the fact that she was hung for murder, when in actual fact these days she would have likely got 2 years suspended for a crime of passion, for somebody who had absolutely abused her and caused her bodily harm. So she was really fighting back. But, I mean, that's not the way to fight back, is it? Anyway, that's why I believe that one of the reasons why we shouldn't have the death penalty, because today, you know, Ruth Ellis would not be hung. She hasn't been pardoned, by the way. There have been numerous petitions handed to the government. The last one being to when Gordon Brown was the Prime Minister at number 10, but it wasn't upheld that she be exonerated. The other case I want to talk about is that of Derek William Bentley. Now, Derek William Bentley was intellectually impaired. He was of subnormal intellect, and he was hung at Wandsworth Prison on the 28th of January 1953. Strange thing about these hangings, they all took place at 9 AM. And again, the hangman was Albert Puerepoint. The thing about Derek Bentley is that he didn't actually shoot anybody, didn't kill anybody. In fact, at the time that it was a police officer that was killed, but at the time, Derek Bentley was actually, he'd surrendered to the police. And he was standing next to the detective sergeant who had been previously shot in the shoulder by his accomplice. They were breaking into a store, on the roof breaking into a warehouse, and the police arrived, and Bentley gave himself up to the police when they came, but his accomplice didn't, and he pointed a gun at the detective sergeant who was going to arrest him, and Derek Bentley shouted out to him, "Let him have it," meaning let him have the gun, not let him have it as in shoot him. Yeah, well, that's what. But Derek Bentley wouldn't really know how to frame the words properly, because, as I said, he was intellectually impaired. Today, they would never have sentenced Derek Bentley to anything more than a couple of years for being an accomplice to the offences committed, because he had no input to the killing of the police constable, because the police constable then, after the detective sergeant got shot, tried to take the gun off him and was shot dead. But this was perhaps 10 minutes after Derek Bentley had surrendered. Yeah, he'd given himself up to the police. But nonetheless, at the Old Bailey, he was sentenced to death, and he was hung at Wandsworth Prison. And it's deplorable. You wouldn't hang somebody who was mentally incapacitated. And the prisons are full of people who are intellectually impaired. They're absolutely full of them. You go and have a look. I mean, I believe, that a good 30, maybe 40% of the inmates of HM prisons today are unable to effectively read and write. They are illiterate, yeah. And the problem with being illiterate in a very literate society is that you can't function. And being unable to function, you've got to eat. So what they do is they turn to petty crime. The number of people in our prisons who are locked up for minor offences is an insult to society. And as for people saying that they would bring back the death penalty, he deserves to hang. You wouldn't hang Derek Bentley, would you? You wouldn't hang Ruth Ellis today. So absolutely, I do not agree with the death penalty. and it doesn't have any effect. It wouldn't stop people from committing an offence, you know. All the people I know who've committed serious offences, they are not thinking about the consequences. They're thinking about what they're doing at the time. You know, if they're going to knife somebody, if they're going to strangle them, they just completely lose it and go for it. They don't think about what's going to happen at the end. Anyway, it's that time of day. It's the Song Dinger. We've had a special request, from a really nice guy who lives on a boat, actually. His name is Michael Fair, specialist mechanic, used to service my E-Type Jag. Yes, folks, I had an E-Type Jag for 7 years, and Michael wanted me to pay a tribute to that wonderful comedic character, a guy, wonderful fun. We've all enjoyed him for a long, long time. He's in my very favourite episode of Fawlty Towers when he plays the part of the spoon salesman. Yes, it's Bernard Cribbins, and as a tribute to the wonderful, wonderful memory of Bernard Cribbins, I am now going to demolish his song. Yeah, sorry about that, Bernard. If you can hear me up there, yeah, it's a hole in the ground. Are you sitting comfortably? There I was, a-digging this hole, a hole in the ground, so big and so round. It was flat at the bottom and the sides were steep, when along comes a bloke in a bowler, which he lifted and scratched his head. Well, he looked down the hole, poor demented soul, and he said, "Do you mind if I make a suggestion? Don't dig it there, dig it elsewhere. You're digging it round, and it ought to be square. The shape of it's wrong, it's much too long, and you can't put a hole where a hole don't belong." I ask you, what a liberty! I nearly bashed him right in the bowler. Well, there was I, stood in me hole, shoveling earth for all that I was worth. And there was him, standing up there, so grand and official, with his nose in the air. So I gave him a look sort of sideways, and leaned on my shovel and sighed. "Well, I'll let me a fag, and having took a drag, I replied, I just couldn't bear to dig it elsewhere. I'm digging it round 'cause I don't want it square. And if you disagree, well, it don't bother me. That's the place where the hole's gonna be." Well, there we were, discussing this hole, a hole in the ground, so big and sort of round. 'Course, it's not there now. The ground's all flat, and beneath it is a bloke in a bowler hat. And that's that. There you go. A hole in the ground. My tribute to Bernard Cribbins, and especially for my friend Michael Fair. Tales from the Jails. Don't forget, subscribe, like, all the rest of it. See you soon.